So first of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody who's joined this webinar. My name is Preetham. I'm the director for IoT and OT cybersecurity products at Subex here, based in Denver, trying to stay out of cold. It was -5 yesterday. So with me, I have our head of marketing, Prayut. Initially, we had Kiran Zachariah, who was our global business head, supposed to be joining the webinar session, but he had some family emergencies due to which he had to drop out last minute. However, we have Prayut, who's the head of our product marketing global division group, also an author of a cybersecurity book. Glad to have Prayut with us today. A quick introduction from your end, Prayut.
Thank you, Preetham. That was great. Glad to be here, stepping in for Kiran. As you said, Kiran had certain emergencies to deal with. We'll try to fill in his shoes to the best extent possible. But more importantly, it's a very important topic that we're covering today, Preetham. So I would like to hear your thoughts as well, and also to looking forward to a lot of questions from the audience, which is why we want this to be a very interactive session. And folks out there, thank you for joining once again. And Preetham, over to you. Let's get things rolling.
Great. Thank you so much, Prayut. And so, as everybody can see today, our topic for the day is based on the manufacturing profile that compares with NIST V 1.1 cybersecurity adoption challenges. We're seeing quite a lot of questions across the industries and across our customers, where we are being asked, constantly telling, there is a new framework. Here are all the different templates. There is about over 108 controls that need to be applied on based on some of these cybersecurity frameworks, best practices. How do we start? Where do we start? What are some of the what does our adoption journey look like? So we wanted to kind of curate all the topics that are important, and how do we address, and what are we seeing in the industry today, and address some of these critical issues, and how do industries, companies, businesses get started with the cybersecurity framework, right? So in this topic, we'll be talking briefly about for the next 20 to 30 minutes, where we will try to share all the topics or information around the what is cybersecurity framework, and what does manufacturing profile or profiling in that mean. What's the current industrial threat landscape that we are looking at? What are the adoption challenges, the gaps? How do we improve it, and how do we plan and execute towards the end? Definitely, we'd like to give as much time as possible for everybody to ask questions, and hopefully we are able to answer most of the questions. If not, I promise we will get back to you personally with the answers for all the questions that has been posted. With that, let's just get started with the introduction. So what we see here is the overall operational landscape. And in this webinar, we want to cover the overall infrastructure security that can span across your IT, your IoT, and your operational technology. What we're seeing here, especially with the IT security that currently majority of the companies have adopted to, is just the tip of the iceberg. There is a big depth of operational technology security out there, which is still unknown. Most of the companies still find it as a wild west because of various reasons. And it'll be an interesting way how these two merge together. And that's something that we provide to most of our customers. And glad to be part here, having this conversation with you, trying to exchange some thoughts more about the operational technology space, how the critical infrastructure, how the cyber physical systems are closely connected and getting connected with the IT environment, and what are the implications, challenges that we see, and how do we overcome that. So it's an interesting topic, and personally my favorite one. So with that, directly diving deep into what do we have. So NIST has been working extensively on building the cybersecurity framework for many years now. However, the most recent one, due to the large attacks that we have seen, especially in the United States, requires this attention that's the topic of the hour today, where the NIST cybersecurity framework globally covers five main areas, as we put it. So while there is the whole aspect of what does the confidentiality to our data look like, where is our information, what does the integrity of our data look like, and how do we maintain the availability? Personally, when we look at cyber physical systems, we see that yes, there is confidentiality to the data that is being sent out with the IP, the information that is required is important, but also, most importantly, when we talk about operational technology, it's the availability that is critical to us. So when we talk about the availability, it can have direct implications towards the physical access to those systems. They are generating, or they're actually responsible for day-to-day operations, and any cyber attacks on those physical systems can negatively impact the businesses, cause downtime. Recently we had seen about a year and a half ago, Pemex, one of the largest companies working on critical infrastructure in Mexico, had about 2 weeks downtime. They had to pay almost $5 million in ransom, and they also ended up losing their productivity for over 2 weeks. And there are several instances, as that most recently I was reading today, where AWS has a major outage that's causing several Amazon and related sites and businesses to stop still for a few hours, losing millions and millions of dollars. So looking at all these things, what we see when we talk about cybersecurity framework, especially building a profile, is to have two main footprints or blueprints, where we kind of look at what does our current profile look like, and what should be our target profile that we will be building, and how do we customize that to our business. Now, there is no based on I think the experiences that the industries have today, there is no specific template that the CSF mandates or guides. It actually gives the guidelines, the best practices that can be customized to individual organizations based on how their infrastructure is laid out, based on how their network topology is, what kind of IT and OT integrations they have today. So with that, starting with the first step, it's critically important to ensure where and how do we look at what is the identification. So what are where and how our assets are identified. So now this is a continuous process. The first thing to know is what is out there that we know or we do not know. Maybe there is something, there are some attack surfaces that has been existent for years, and we just do not have the existing controls, or do not have the existing skills within the company to actually look at specific areas, how these assets respond to potential intrusions or potential data exfiltrations or anything that is related to a potential attack, let's say. So the most important thing that the cybersecurity framework guides is to be able to identify, conduct a risk mitigation process. So a risk assessment followed by the risk mitigation, where I'm able to identify, understand what exactly is my vulnerability, where is my attack surface today, what does basically talking about what is the risk appetite that our businesses have, and then scoring those risk appetites based on the criticality or the severity of the information that we identify. Now, this has been in existence for years or for decades in IT. But the most important thing is, when I look at industrial or operational technology, there are top three things that come into picture. One is the protocols that are actually used to communicate between or communicate by these industrial purpose-built devices. They may be using legacy protocols, some of them using proprietary protocols, which are very vendor specific. Now, how do we know that some of those protocol level vulnerabilities are not exposed? Identifying what assets are in the system. So the second point is to understand how many assets are that are out there which are connected. We might have our operational technology air gap for the most part of it, but even with an air gap network, there's always internal activity connectivity that will require an access to some of these endpoints. What do we have on the endpoint security? When we are moving into the digital transformation, how are we looking at network security assessment of these operational technology, rolling out the mitigation plan, rolling out what kind of templates we have? So those are the two important things when we conduct the vulnerability management, when we conduct the risk mitigation process. And then we all understand that once we identify and build the specific priorities that are there, we need to have necessary protection mechanism. So this is where we bring in a specific monitoring technique. So once you identify what are the top 3 or 4 critical things that we have to identify in our operational technology network, and how many of them are interacting with my existing IT, or how many of them are still air gap. So there has to be a baseline that we will they recommend building. So once the baseline is built, the most important aspect of what NIST recommends is to isolate the part of the network that does not require, or maybe that's critical to operations. What are the different controls? We can see it later, but these are some of the things that they recommend having specific segmented networks at layer 0, layer 1, layer 2, and above until 3.5, where you have your DMZ and your IT comes into picture. But within this operational technology, uh, creating an incident management program. So the incident management program detects whether or not we have the baselines and we're conducting regular audits. We need to have a continuous monitoring process. Do I have sufficient anomaly detection process? That is important. Is my operational technology led by threat intelligence driven, which is now driving my cybersecurity for overall my cybersecurity incident management and response program. And then, most importantly, when we talk about while detecting itself, NIST also mandates that when building a profile, it's very important to map these profiles to its relevant compliance metrics. So, what does my existing company compliance look like? What does my organizational risks posture look like? How do we apply the compliance and make sure that my existing incident response plans and whatever incidents that our systems are generating in our operation center, how are we mapping it with with the policies, with the compliance metrics, and then be able to respond to any kind of breach with the playbooks that we have in place. So this is where we see, when we are responding, remediating, and recovering, this is where we see quite a lot of attack remediation techniques, MITRE attack frameworks that come into play, which gives us a full kill chain of how the cyber threats start from reconnaissance all the way to your exploitation phase. How exactly are these different techniques that are focused on the adversaries? What do we need to have in place to address them? And how do we build our playbooks which are specific to our network? So this is something that in a few minutes to just cover what exactly the cybersecurity framework for manufacturing profile covers. So in the next slide, we will also start talking more about the overall trends and what are the challenges. So to explain that, I'm going to hand it over to Prayut, who will share with us some insights, important thoughts around what do we see as current trends and challenges. So Prayut, happy to hear from you.
Hey, thank you, Preetham. Very important points that you mentioned about the pillars of the framework, right? I think that is where the resource attention should go, and that is where we are lacking currently in terms of, if we see how the threat landscape is evolving. Actually, it is factored in the fact that many of the manufacturing entities out there have not really geared up, their response mechanisms to factor in the kind of evolutionary pressures that are out there, which are working to make these hackers develop much what you'd say, more potent versions or variants of the malware out there, to beat these very systems down and take out data, take out confidential information, and take out systems which are out there. Very recently, Pritam, incidentally, as recently as the Thanksgiving weekend, right? We saw a spurt in attacks on manufacturers, right? Again, there are a lot of these episodes which are tied in with either geopolitical events, either with holidays, or some kind of distraction that might be on the horizon, or potential distraction that might be out there. So when we look at the trends that are happening, obviously the attacks are on the rise, and these attacks have definitely got an origin in the kind of challenges that manufacturers are facing in to improve and evolve their response mechanisms, and also their strategies to sort of box in these cyber attacks and sort of take them away from their core systems and what they have in their OT and other infrastructures that we're seeing. So the governance mechanism is what where the key challenges are emerging from, because the structures and the frameworks that Preetham you mentioned are all geared towards IT. So OT is something that has been neglected for a fairly long period of time. This has got to do with various reasons, but mainly what this has led to is that the mechanism, the governance structures have not evolved to keep up with the kind of threat landscape changes that we've seen in the last couple of decades. Then again, we have seen that though there is a lot of attention coming in from the compliance side, especially as far as the critical infrastructure is concerned, but then again, there are a lot of voluntary mandates that have been presented to various entities, including cyber critical infrastructure operators and manufacturers as well. So these are early days for these frameworks to sort of be utilized, and so for them to mature and settle in into the operational processes and what have you, as far as the manufacturers are concerned. And we are going in that direction, but we are not going fast enough. So that is becoming a challenge again. Enhancing the security levels and efficacy of existing cybersecurity mechanisms, very important point there. This again is an outcome of the slow evolution that is happening, because all the mechanisms that we have are all geared towards IT. OT does require, or rather is getting some attention, but then again, we can do with more attention, more resources, more planning, more strategizing, and to also operate with a large amount or a lot of visibility, so that we are very clear as to what is happening at various levels out there, and what kind of breach tactics are these hackers and other actors out there playing with to create these challenges for us. Rolling out a compliance program, again, institutional response mechanisms have really lagged in the kind of, as I said, they are not aligned to the forces which are playing out there. So these are the forces which are putting not just an evolutionary pressure, but they are also putting an economic pressure on manufacturers to sort of evolve themselves. By that I mean that at one end we are seeing manufacturers sort of working towards putting these structures in place. On the other, we are also seeing that the hackers are staying a step ahead of these mechanisms and sort of creating these breaches and sort of other challenges, security challenges for manufacturers at various points in time. So everything takes a step back once a cyber attack takes place, right? There are a lot of revenue losses. There is loss in production. There is loss in capacity. There will be reputational challenges that come in. Overall, it creates a situation where the entire roadmap of a manufacturer gets disrupted, and that has been the biggest outcome of a lack of a compliance program that runs across an enterprise. System and infrastructure protection strategies, again, these have not kept up with the kind of evolution we are seeing in cyberspace as far as malware developers are concerned. Things are moving, but as I said, they are not moving fast enough. We need to do a lot more. We need to have much more easy to adopt frameworks. We need to also have some level of flexibility as far as institutions are concerned, so that they can move much faster. They can incorporate these frameworks and mechanisms much more easily, and they can also sort of adapt to to all these evolutionary forces that are operating around them. So the current industrial threat landscape has a lot to do with what has happened in the last 2 to 3 decades, right? If you take a look at the kind of infrastructures that are in place today, there are a lot of manufacturing entities who are operating OT devices which have been manufactured 2 decades to 3 decades ago, right? And no longer are not only are the folks who manufactured them not around, they're not being updated, they're not being patched. That itself has created a big challenge for a lot of these manufacturers. Some of whom are not even aware as to what these devices are currently doing in their device ecosystem. So if you look at the first point there, Preetham, which is the digital transformation, right? So if you look at what's happening on the IIoT front, where we are moving in a phased manner towards larger amounts or rather significant automation, we are bringing in newer devices. In the last 2 years, Preetham, what we have seen from our vantage point, a lot of devices have been brought online without enough testing, right? Because of this huge requirement for sort of remote monitoring of systems. So a lot of devices were brought into the market by a lot of these vendors without enough testing, and there was not enough research attention being paid into the kind of impact, cybersecurity impact this would have on the infrastructure of a manufacturer or anybody else. So they were incorporated very fast. There was not enough attention paid to any vulnerabilities, how the cyber security posture would get disrupted, or what kind of challenges would it eventually lead to. But then again, the hackers on the other side had planned all this, or rather strategized on all these fronts, and they stayed a step ahead, which is why we saw a lot of breaches happening as soon as COVID settled in, and we saw the first and second waves in various countries, and it almost became very predictable in terms of the kind of attacks we were seeing over that period of time. But we're happy that though the attacks have gone up, now the breaches have come down because obviously manufacturers are taking some very important steps. But then again, it's a good journey. I mean, just a start of the journey, I must rather say. There's still a lot more that needs to be done. Cloudification, smart manufacturing, threat-free operations, all of these have to do again, Preetham, when we take this all back to the governance structures that are currently out there. They definitely have to evolve. There is a lot more that needs to be done on that front. We also need to take some very concrete steps towards ensuring that we have more insight into what's happening into the network. We are aware of the vulnerabilities that are out there, and that we don't bring in any devices or any aspects or components into the infrastructure that we are not confident about, Preetham. So I'll hand it back to you to take it. Oh, sorry, the cybersecurity adoption challenges. I'll make it very fast here. I know I've
Sounds
taken a lot of time. So basically, as I said, there is a lot of these devices that we're seeing have are vintage. They are of archaeological significance, as I might call it as such. So all this over the period of time, the kind of complexity that has been associated with OT infrastructure has grown significantly. You have vintage devices, you have devices which are current, and you have newer devices which are getting added. So this presents the cybersecurity teams with a very complex environment to secure, and that is why there is so many instances of breaches happening, because there is no standardization, there is no homogenization, sorry, so to say, and manufacturers have become a desired targets of these adversaries. Preetham, you must have heard about what happened in November last year, where there was a list of manufacturers taken from a particular industry body, and pretty much everybody on that list was attacked, right? So that itself shows you how much appetite these hackers and malware developers actually have for targeting these manufacturing entities. These are sophisticated players. They may be APT groups, but we are not entirely sure if all of them are APT. They are not. There must be independent hackers also who are acting just to get some ransom and keep their malware factories going, so to say. So there's a lot of legacy, lot of legacy equipment. There's relationship between IT and OT teams. This can be a presentation or rather a webinar in itself, Vedam, in fact, because we're seeing these synergies that are required to ensure that at the end of the day, cybersecurity is handled in a unified way, paying due diligence to the kind of challenges that each technology stream brings, and also paying adequate amount of resource attention to all the technology streams that are there, be it IT, be it OT, or be it IoT for that matter. That is not developed as such, because because of this independent evolution that I mentioned earlier on, in which the IT stream went in a certain way, OT stream went in a certain way as such. So many protocols, proprietary technologies, and the expertise point that is mentioned there, right? That the experience is what matters. In some cases, though, there have been manufacturers who have been around for a while, but from a security perspective, since the device ecosystem has constantly kept on changing due to various reasons, a certain uniformity in cybersecurity approaches have not evolved with them. So that itself is really creating a challenge right now. So if we can get the governance part right, if we can align everything with a target profile that you're going to talk about, Preetham, and have a sort of a working profile built in a step before that, where we incorporate these elements of governance that have lacked, I think we can do a much better job in tackling these hackers, and we can definitely defeat them.
Yeah,
So over to you,
absolutely. I
Preetham.
mean, I think you mentioned a very important point there, right? Because what we had seen last year, November, some of these potential threat actors actually stayed dormant in the networks for almost 6 months before
Right.
they could actually, exploit the networks, right? So
Right.
that actually creates a good segue for me to start off what exactly, as part of the manufacturing profile that we talk about, there is an important gap analysis step
Yeah.
that is required by most of the organization. That's required by every organization to perform
Absolutely.
before they start or during their security strategy discussions. And how exactly are we going to initiate some of these controls that are relevant to our organizations, right? So frameworks like these, and especially the framework profile that NIST mandates, it is while there are several other frameworks, this specific one actually is used as an outcome based model, especially focused on the business needs to achieve what will be the desired state. And now it's again a moving window. So we see that threat landscape changes almost every single day. So it definitely is something that I would like to highlight, that it's a continuous process that we work with our customers. And generally, what we have seen is that when it is done right, it's done in a more continuous manner, and not at what we see in sometimes where because of the time and because of the budgets and how the security is taken as an afterthought towards the digital transformation, we see that it is usually once or twice a year, and that is something, that mindset is changing. This is becoming a line item in almost every single critical needs as part of the project, as part of your our backend operations, our supply chain program, every aspect in the overall product life cycle, or any kind of new initiative that companies come in. This kind of profile setting is actually becoming a standard norm that it mandates. So what do we see here? So this is where we actually talk about what is our current profile, or what does the current state look like in our infrastructure, and what is the target or the desired state that we would want to achieve, and what are the list of items that we would need in order to achieve that state. So as we see, we've identified again a non-exhaustive list of about four different topics or major points which talks about this current state. So yes, our operational technology is complex. We have quite a bit of legacy infrastructure. So how well do we know what is connected to our IoT network? So we always have been talking about Purdue models. With the advent of IoT and digital industry 4.0 transformation, there is a break in that Purdue model. So there are solutions, there are technology today which is getting bolted on to our legacy infrastructure in order to do predictive maintenance, remote monitoring, analytics, and any data that we can get out of our industrial control systems, right? So that becomes critical to understand how well do we know what is connected, how what does our inventory look like, which is connecting back to our IT networks, what are the assets which are monitored by our existing security operations team, and what controls do we have. So that's the limitations of OT and ICS security controls that we see today. So now the frameworks that we see, they're not prescriptive. So they're not prescribed to follow any specific template to stay compliant, right? But they help you being compliant against several others that we have talked in the past, mentioning about your NERCIP, talking about your IEC 62443, ENISA. So there is several different compliance metrics and standards that are coming there. And how well do we identify what is required for us to map it with those compliances that we are working based on the industry that we are part of? right? And also the risks on the industrial machines itself. So can we afford a downtime on our critical infrastructure? So today, do we have enough controls that talk about how do we afford that downtime,
Right.
or how do we mitigate or minimize that downtime? And what also the talking about the compatibility of our current existing technology, which we have in our IT versus the legacy technology. And are we using the same set of controls to actually monitor our industrial control system? Do we have a focused or targeted approach on what exactly do we need to have in place in order to monitor or even respond to certain type of threats that I'm seeing in my industrial network, right? So those are some of the things in its current state the organizations are seeing. But then where exactly can they go from here? How this profile helps them is by building out an action plan. So mainly talking about I have 108 controls that I need to match. Now it's a complex, exhaustive process, but most of those controls are already available with our existing security planning cycle. We already have implemented a certain percentage of that. So what is the gap that we see today, which we do not have, and how do we bring those controls into our existing into our existing security monitoring is something that we will identify. Now, there is other caveats that come into it, talking about the current needs. So is this a plan, let's say 2022, or do we want to defer it to a 2023 plan because of the resources, because of the funding and budgeting that we have? So that's always a question that comes in. And basically, what we have seen is that companies are more and more focusing on including this in a much earlier plan and much faster as possible rather than deferring it to the next financial year, to the next planning cycle. That gives definitely that builds, because my technology and my infrastructure is also changing over a year's period. The next thing is also prioritizing those risks. So I cannot address everything at the same time. So what are the most important relevant tasks that we need to identify based on this baselining, based on the modeling that we have done across our threat profiles? So we can probably prioritize it as based on the impact and the likelihood of the cyber threat that's happening. So once you have that matrix in place, it becomes much easier to prioritize these risks and then see, do we already have some existing controls in it, or do I need to go talk to a vendor, or do I need to go talk to an external partner who can help us solve these problems? And then how do I map all these with our organizational risks that we have identified? So keeping the executive teams in loop, telling here are the different set of controls that we do not have today, and these are the things that we would want to include in our security profiling to ensure that we stay cyber resilient in the operational technology, and also creating or minimizing the catastrophic impact that it can have on business. So everything security related to a downtime, related to unavailability, are all directly impacting the business's reputation and things like that. So having that is super critical. And great. You actually started off well showing the slide, because this is something that I wanted to just share with everybody. A quick, a snippet of a particular ICS device controller, which is one of the several devices that are to be installed in the operational facilities, right? We have different SCADA systems which run on Modbus, your BACnet, your BAS controllers that are connecting on your layer 2 protocol level, that are connected inside your infrastructure. Now, when we see this, when we do an assessment on this, we see that there is already a CVE that has been identified, which is vendor specific. And the criticality, so the CVE 3.0, based on the scores, has identified that there is a buffer overflow issue. But then how do we actually look at specific endpoints that are carrying out these type of device profiles and then build controls on it? Because if I use my existing security that are for our IT systems, so my desktops, laptops, and mobiles, they will not even have a way to list out these kind of vulnerabilities that are very specific to these devices. So that's where we kind of have laid out what exactly we think should be the process that we work with our customers and most of them follow, is basically fingerprinting based on what we scan on the device. So what accesses do people have on your ICS devices like these? What kind of privileges that your admins, your operational team actually has on the device type on this? What is the password policies, which are preliminary checks that has to be cleared off, making sure that we are not using default password. We're not we're basically employing a zero trust, which means unless required, nobody gets any access into these devices. Then going a little bit further down to understand what does the protocol vulnerabilities look like. Are there any existing protocol vulnerabilities that can expose, even though the devices and the infrastructure is inherently secure? Maybe there is somebody else trying to communicate over it. Maybe they're exploiting a vulnerability that exists within the protocol or the message that are either in transit or at rest. So those are some of the important aspects to start with. And based on that, we see fingerprinting and then identifying contextual based current profile. So this is what it gives you. Here is what my current profile looks like. Here are these are all the different vulnerabilities I've identified. Maybe I will only pick the top, the critical ones that are directly going to impact our business, then create a response plan for it. And then assessing what does my vulnerability management for that look like? How do we overlay? So one of the most important aspects that NIST also talks about quite a lot is it's not here to replace anything that is currently in practice, but it is to overlay and complement your existing security controls with some of these things, which are talking about certain vulnerabilities or certain gaps that are identified, not covered by our traditional security measures, and then establishing your target profile customized templates based on what our findings are. And further to that, enabling your detection mechanisms and then your response playbooks. So this gives you a clear, streamlined view of how you include or adopt to all the security, security postures, building your security postures, and adopt that security strategy with your existing operations and not replacing anything, right? So in the next slide, we also can talk a little bit about what exactly this means to the current business. So where do we fit in? So we currently have four main pillars where we work with our customers. So one is to looking at these specific profiles that I just explained as an example, to enhancing the current security posture on those current profiles, which means understanding what exactly are the device exposures or the risk exposures that the system is providing, how this fits into the current profile of your security controls that you have, understanding the underlying requirements, mapping out all the inventories with their risks, vulnerabilities, and then giving our customers the ability to create certain incident management systems or incident management controls to be able to respond in an event of breach or proactively focus on mitigating them before a breach can happen. So that calls about the real-time risk assessments. So we do suggest and we work extensively on passive vulnerability assessment. Most of the industrial devices are resource are limited with respect to the resources. So what kind of security controls they can run on the device or the endpoints itself. So having a passive base. So for example, I may not even have to look at the device logs in certain cases. We may have to rely on the historian logs that are being sent out, or maybe logs that have been generated from layer 3 and above to go further into a step where identifying certain patterns which can help us understand what are the potential impacts and what is the likelihood of an attack on this particular profile that we have seen. So using those pattern-based techniques, then we enable continuous monitoring. So once the controls are in place, the system constantly monitors for any changes with those current profile, any changes in the environment, any anomalies detected. And we have our own honeypot lab where we actually expose these devices that I showed in the previous slides to external threat actors and constantly record what and how their attack path looks like and build controls over it. So that is then driven as an intelligence-led response management system from Sectrio to building out necessary playbooks and incident response programs. So these are the four steps and how we work with our customers today in not just enhancing their existing controls, even to those customers who do not have or probably are still in the early phases of their roadmap and how exactly they want to start building out these security controls, right? So what we provide as part of it is a thorough technical workshop, a demo. So talk to us about the in-depth workshop on some of these device-specific aspects of what are the risks and how are they connecting back into your own OT or your IT or external environment. Then we provide threat assessments with proof of value, proof of concept to show the potential of what the threat actors can do and how do we build controls, identify and build controls over it with a quick 2 week proof of value, proof of concepts, just purely conducting passive vulnerability assessment techniques. So those are some of the immediate ways how we always engage with our customers. A very low or less intensive process, not a lot of time or resources required from our customers, where we do the heavy lifting and help them create these kind of profiles that can map with the cybersecurity framework profiles that NIST and several others are talking about. Right. So with that, I think we do have about 15 minutes time. More than happy to answer any questions, any thoughts, any comments, any feedback. Happy to hear from you. And Prayukt, if you have a couple of anything to say, please feel free to share your thoughts.
Hey, thanks, Pritam. That was wonderful, very insightful. You took us through the entire journey, and you left us with the way in which Sectrio can help as well. I think you've covered the whole thing. Just one point I wanted to put out there for all who have attended today. We are working on templatizing the entire process for NIST cybersecurity framework manufacturing profile, so that you can do a first level self assessment at your own end, and then you can sort of come to us and approach us to see how you can build on top of that. So at least you will know where exactly you are in the journey with that particular exercise. We'll be sharing it with everybody who's attended it today, Preetham. So that's going to be another takeaway for all participants today. So watch out for it, folks. It will be coming in your inboxes in the next week. We're just giving it some final touches at our end. That's it from my side, Preetham. We can wait for some questions or any comments, any observations, folks. Anything that you would like to share with us. What has your journey been like? What are the kind of challenges that you have experienced, or what are the kind of episodes that you would like to share with us? We are all ears, folks.
There is a question which says, how do you scan the OT devices identified in the related and the related vulnerabilities? I mean, great question, because as I was mentioning earlier, it's not always possible to actively probe some of these OT devices, especially understanding that their critical nature and they're very time or resource intensive ways how they respond to external communications, right? So there are more than one way we actually scan the devices. One is what we call it as a passive scanning. So we basically look at all the different traffic that comes out from these endpoints or devices through, let's say, just studying the PCAP that is coming from the switch or the gateway, or trying to passively monitor it, running some specific SDK scripts on, to get the data from its tertiary servers, like your historian servers. What are the logs that are generating? And then mapping out these different sources to identify what are the related vulnerabilities. Now, in certain cases, if there are very specific in-depth vulnerability assessment that are required, we do need to we do need to reach out to those devices, or at least have an inventory of what the devices look like. And then we do lookups on our own end to already identified our existing vulnerabilities within our honeypot lab, and then map that profile with what our customers have. So these are several techniques that we use to scan them passively with a very low intensive way, mapping it to the profiles we already have in the lab, and then seeing what are the commonalities between these devices and what we have. Even if we do not have certain things, we kind of use the passive scanning techniques to monitor it, conduct the protocol analysis within the solution, and then provide results in the form of reports or even alerts. Some cases. Hopefully that answered the question. If not, happy to send more information on that, how and what we do there.
So, Kenny, we have answered your question there. Yes, this will be available for viewing. We'll be sharing the links with everyone who attended today, so that you can always go back and see if there's any point that you would like to get more clarification on, or anything else. Preetham, there's another question. How can we implement zero trust architecture in an OT environment?
So we start. That's a great question. Again, one of the most first things to implement a complete zero trust architecture is to start early on in the design phase of the OT environment, and knowing that we will not be able to go back because the infrastructure already is in place. So the first thing we currently propose is, usually what we work with our customers is, even before deploying a product or installing a technology that can focus on what the security detection or response should look like. The first thing we look at is, what are the current accesses? What does the threat assessment and threat landscape look like? So based on the scanning, we say, there can be a policy checks that are done. And then what are the accesses? Who has the accesses? Who are authorized to use either the whole network or even a part of the network? And then map this out, telling that, is this access even available? And then following the methodology of least privileges. So first thing is, if anybody does not require an access, in this case, accessing any type of your OT environment or any endpoints in the OT environment, then it should be revoked or completely removed. So that's the first step. Then we move on to the technology aspects of it, where now we are seeing that there are quite a lot of IT and OT integrated environment and environmental issues that we are seeing a lot. So what systems, how exactly are these message communications happening? Are we seeing there are any certain type of OT commands? So sometimes inherently we've seen that there are specific OT commands that are being executed and run on some of these devices just for testing for certain type of checks that are performing. So making sure that who's executing this command, are these, and then looking at these systems devices. End of the day, they could be a Linux, they could be a Windows-based systems or servers, and what are the basically looking at what are the commands that are allowed to be executed in this OT environment, and disable anything that is not allowed. And then doing a thorough architecture analysis based on the vulnerability assessment, pen testing on those devices, and then addressing those vulnerabilities. So I think these are the top 2 to 3 ways how we can actually start looking at zero trust for the overall infrastructure within the OT environment, and then continue to maintain it.
Thank you, Preetham. There's another question for you, Preetham. Is it possible to integrate OT monitoring with current IT SOC monitoring solution?
Yes. So I think that's another great question. It is possible. One of the key ways, if at all you get a chance to see a demo or a platform, what we currently do is use the MITRE framework technique to map all the different techniques that are present within your IT, and then differentiate the OT as part of it. So based on all the OT specific threats that are identified and incidents that are identified, it then creates specific alerts or incidents that are providing you in terms of what is the source of an attack, what kind of device that was under attack, what messages did their adversary use to execute that attack, and which signature was used, or what kind of signatures that we saw in the presence of that particular sample file that we found it malicious. So each of these incidents are then integrated into existing SOC monitoring solutions. So we have integrations with, let's say, if there is Splunk, or if there is Sentinel, or if there is any other Devo, or any other specific monitoring solutions within the SOC environment that are currently being used. Through APIs, these alerts that is created or generated will then get integrated into your IT SOC monitoring. However, those will be flagged and specifically to what type of OT. So we have something called as an enterprise and ICS differentiation. So based on the alerts that are monitored for ICS, the SOC analysts and teams can easily identify that this is something that's related to our OT controls, or some alerts that we are seeing from our OT, and it is necessary for us to focus on that part of the network to be able to analyze and respond to those type of questions. So yes, in short, it is possible to integrate the OT monitoring in the form of incidents, integrations, and API related techniques to be able to include it within the existing SOC monitoring.
All right. Thank you, Preetham. How can we prevent zero-day attacks? Preetham, your favorite one.
So I think this is something that we also get asked a lot. One of the things about zero-day attacks is that nobody knows it, right? So the only one of the most prominent ways what we have seen is the ability to have certain controls that can actually detect the current state and what is the anomalous state of a particular system. So usually when there are 0 days, nobody has any instance or awareness of what type of attack is it, who's trying to attack. And in most forms, we see that usually 0 days are mostly targeted to APT groups or something that is targeted on the network. So constantly seeing if there is any type of downloads, executables, or anything that is currently present in the system, or even though there are certain spikes within the communication that we see, which are externally communicating outside of the network, or it may be internally communicating between the VLANs that are configured, between the segmented networks that are configured. So when we have we have something called as our AI-based anomaly detection, which specifically looks at both supervised and unsupervised controls of this detection techniques. So any spike there not necessarily mean that it's a 0 day attack, but it clearly calls out a question that there was no scheduled maintenance, or there was no scheduled work that was supposed to be done in this infrastructure today. But we are seeing certain spike, either it is off-peak hours, weekend hours, or maybe at a time that we do not have enough monitoring controls on. That then can raise a flag to further detect what type of potential 0 days that can be available and how it can be mitigated. Hopefully that answered the question, but yeah, it's a tough question. Everybody, we get that question asked a lot, but that's something that the industry itself constantly fights towards how do we prevent and detect 0 day scenarios.
Thank you, Preetham. In case you don't have any questions, you can always, if you have any thoughts that come after we close today's session, you can always reach out to Preetham and me at any time. You can see our email IDs on the bottom left part of your screen.
Here to answer any questions, even like Prayup mentioned, beyond this session, we would like to stay connected and just understand and hear out where and what challenges are you seeing in your current infrastructure, or if there are any specific OT related activities, initiatives that you are working on. Would love to connect and understand a little bit more on it, as it's very different for different companies and different networks or infrastructure. So happy to connect outside of this webinar, have a session. So we do plan to have a one-on-one discussions if anybody would want. As I mentioned, we can always provide a risk-free threat assessment that can also help you just understand and baseline what are the security controls we need to build, even if we are in the early phase of our roadmap program. So with that, first of all, thank you very much for everybody who took time, joined us to hear our view on what the NIST V1.1 manufacturing framework looks like, especially when we are building out a manufacturing profile. Looks like what are the challenges in adoption, the gaps, analysis techniques. Hopefully, the examples we shared kind of not answer the question, but raises more questions to go back and think through. So that's kind of the thoughts we would want to leave behind. Once again, happy holidays. Best wishes for the new year. Have a great, successful 2022. We look forward to keeping in touch with everybody here in the new year or even rest of the month in December. So Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and advanced wishes to a very successful 2022.
Stay safe, everyone, and secure.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great rest of your day and have a good weekend.